So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you, depending on which part of the globe you are in. Thank you for being here. I'm Raj Pandit, Dean of Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability at the OP Jindal Global University and moderator for this discussion. The title of the theme of this session is Shifting Goalposts, Universities' Role in Achieving Sustainable Developmental Goals in G20 countries. At the outset, on behalf of the OP Jindal Global University and on my own behalf, I welcome the distinguished speakers to the session. I also extend a warm welcome to the participants who have joined us or will be joining us on the online platforms. Today, the distinguished panel of speakers with us here are Professor David Finegold, who is President of Chatham University, USA, Professor Richard Follett, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Global Engagement, University of Exeter, UK, Professor Joseph Wong, Vice President, International University of Toronto, Canada, Professor Miki Sugimura, Professor Department of Education at Sophia University, Japan, and last but not the least, Professor Meera, Sampath, Associate Dean for Research, Binghamton University, USA. Well, as I told in my email that I would be brief in my remarks, then we can go for open discussion. Just to say that speaking of the shifting goalposts, one of such shifts in the SDGs framework that needs some kind of recognition and also appreciation is the fact that to broaden the focus beyond primary and secondary education, tertiary education itself was included in the SDGs. In that sense, as universities, we are part of the shifting goalpost, if I may. Briefly, before I hand over to the floor to the first speaker, may I, with your permission, put the session in the context. Universities, as we all believe, as we all know, that are uniquely placed to make effective interventions in the success of sustainable development goals. I say so because, as opposed to the primary and secondary education institutions, universities are both creators and deliverers of knowledge. We also are the creators of final products, be it human resource, be it technology, policy, administration, etc. And these products enter the society and markets, and they become important drivers and influencers of actions, whatever, or inactions, many a time. That said, I also wish to make a couple of broad issues, to point out to broad issues under the broad framework of a sustainable development paradigm, which as academics and researchers and policymakers or even influencers, we may like to highlight and ponder on. These are broadly the orthodoxy of economic development model itself, to the universality of themes as well as approaches to achieve sustainable development goals, which is essentially still a top-down approach. And third is lack of appreciation for inclusion of regional local approaches or practices to achieve sustainable development goals, particularly in the context of international development. There could be many more, in fact, many others as well, but I just thought that I would broadly touch upon these. And I will stop here and end with a personal note on the broad subject. I have argued elsewhere that sustainable development is an oxymoron. Therefore, we may have sustainable living as a more sustainable and achievable goal rather than this sustainable development itself. But that I will leave for another day. So I would, now with these brief remarks, I would go to the first speaker for the day, for the session, Professor David Finegold. He is the 19th president of Chatham University, USA, with over 3 decades of experience in higher education as a researcher, author, podcaster, academic dean, and senior vice president and chief academic officer. Professor Finegold graduated summa cum laude from Harvard and was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, where he received his DPhil in politics. He is a renowned scholar and educational innovator who has dedicated his life and career to education reform, the design of high-performance organizations, and extensive comparative research on education and skill creation systems from around the world. For his interest in lifelong learning, Professor Finegold has led a range of key initiatives, including overseeing international programs of continuing studies, expanding partnerships with community colleges. We are happy to learn that Professor Finegold, along with colleagues from Tata Institute of Social Sciences here in India, was one of the 4 recipients of Obama's Think 21st Century Knowledge Initiative Award to build higher education capacity in India. Welcome, Professor Finegold. You may give your initial remarks now. You have 4 minutes, as I said earlier. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Raj, and thanks to the organizers for including me in this very impressive global summit. I'm going to speak briefly from 2 perspectives. First, as the 19th president of Chatham University, but also as the chair of the President's Advisory Council for Second Nature, a body which brings together 450 universities from across the US that have committed to getting to net zero in our operations. Chatham, for those who don't know us, was founded back in 1869 as the first opportunity for women to get a degree in our region in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have been committed since then to creating educational opportunity and moving forward on social justice. And we're very proud that our most famous alum is Rachel Carson, the author of Silent Spring and one of the founders of the modern environmental movement. To honor her legacy, back in 2008, we were given a nearly 400-acre farm, and we have built that as the home for our School for Sustainability, investing $50 million to create the greenest campus in the US, which serves as a living learning lab for how to live sustainably, as Raj has urged us, how people can envisage and see in practice a more sustainable future that combines geothermal, solar, wind energy with microgrids, organic agriculture, and is a place where students can work with faculty on hands-on project to build a greener future together. At Chatham, we are committed across the university on the SDGs. Every student must take at least 1 course on sustainable development. And we believe that it's not just to train the specialists and innovators who will move this forward, but that every informed citizen, government leader, and business leader needs to understand the systemic challenges we're facing as a society and the $30 trillion opportunity in solving these. Second Nature is an organization which, if you're not familiar, I would encourage all to consider getting involved with and joining, because we work together as a higher ed sector. We met at the most recent climate summit to try to advance climate action. And Second Nature recently recognized this need to accelerate movement on climate by shifting its focus from helping individual universities get to net zero to recognizing that universities are key actors where we need to bring together all of our stakeholders, faculty, students, alums, working with the community and policymakers to leverage all of our capabilities to not just move our institutions, but our whole regions and countries forward. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Professor Finegold. I now invite the next speaker, Professor Richard Follett, who is currently the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Global Engagement at the University of Exeter, UK. He got his BA and MA from the University of Wales and the University of London, respectively. Later, as a Fulbright scholar, his work focused on American slavery, which earned him a doctoral degree at the Louisiana State University. Professor Follett leads the development and diverse delivery of university's global strategy with oversight of the university's global activities, including student recruitment, global experiences for staff and students, establishing and leading the university's relationships with key global partners, and engaging alumni around the world. He's an elected fellow of the Royal Society of Historical Society. Richard specializes in history of African-American slavery. He enjoys a strong international reputation for his scholarship and public engagement work. He has over a decade-long service at the senior levels at the university leadership in the field of international education. He also chairs the university's UK International Africa and Middle East Network and serves on several strategic advisory boards. Professor Follett, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much for the introduction, Raj. And I think I would like to start really my observations around not just the University of Exeter, which I'm delighted to represent today, a university that has at the very heart of its agenda a green environmental futures agenda. It is one of the world leading universities for climate science. 5 of the top 10 climate scientists on Earth are located at the University of Exeter. So in one very simple respect, it is by consequence a research hub on sustainability and indeed environmental futures. But I think the question to me really is, as universities working across the sector, and we've just heard from David on the work that they're doing at Chatham, but I think the question I would ask is, what can we as a university sector do together to deliver the SDG agenda? And I'm honoured to work with Indian colleagues on the Association of Commonwealth Universities SDG and Higher Education Network. And for those of you in India particularly, I would really warmly encourage you to reach out both to myself and to the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, which is the lead Indian university in the HE and SDG agenda. But I think in a nutshell, and I won't delay us very long as we're setting the context, I think sustainability in many respects, like social justice, has become a net accelerator through the pandemic. These issues have been really fast forwarded through the pandemic and through public activism, student activism. And of course, the issues over sustainability predate the pandemic. We think of Greta Thunberg and her speech at Davos, for example. But clearly, sustainability and social justice are the powerful generators of our generation of students. As such, I think in many respects, sustainability, and it's interesting to hear Chatham's experience in this context, sustainability has almost become a new common language, a lingua franca, crossing over university students wherever they are from. And that's the key point around it. It's a common language linking kids in Canada, India, the UK, Nigeria, and everywhere else in between. A common language that we need to be working to deliver, both in the education framework, and that we heard a little bit about Chatham's examples in that respect, but also we need to be ensuring that this is a core skill that is embedded in all of our students' work. And that way, it becomes really a common university agenda. So the place that we hold in education is key. Clearly, many of our universities are also actively involved in research around the SDGs. And one of the really critical pieces of work that we need to do is that within the 17 SDGs, there are many interlocking sub-themes. Now, to really tackle the delivery of the SDGs isn't around the headline 17. It's about ensuring that we knock out and create the synergies, the cross-linkages across those synergies. And I think we have in higher education a great opportunity to make universities key points of integration in the knowledge exchange over the SDG frameworks. And I think there's one final part that I'll reference, and I think we've already heard a little bit about it, is what can universities do themselves? Clearly, we can become hubs for net zero work, but net zero is hugely expensive. And let us be blunt about it. Those of you who have net zero offsetting platforms, those of you who wish to make your campuses net zero, and I had the opportunity being in Sonipat at OP Jindal only a matter of 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I know that you'll work in this area as well. But as we look forward to that net zero, obligation that is true for our students, true for our university community, true for our countries too. We need to recognize, A, the costs of this, but also what can we do to make our universities key partners in that transition, partnering with offshore wind, partnering with solar power, and also partnering with civil society to deliver some of the other SDGs. For example, not just healthy living, but gender equality. What can we do as organizations to enhance that? What can we do as organizations to enhance living standards? So I think there's an opportunity here, and we can chat about these things later, but an opportunity for universities, my own and everybody's here, to really deliver on the education, the research, the knowledge exchange, and finally, if you like, how we use universities to deliver major contribution. Think of the university as an agent in its own right, and its academics as, in effect, other forms of agency. Thank you, Raj.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks. Our next speaker is Professor Joseph Wong, who is currently the Vice President International at the University of Toronto, and Ralph and Rose Halbert, Professor of Innovation at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at U of T. Joseph is a professor in the Department of Political Science and has held the Canada Research Chair in Democratization, Health and Development for 2 terms from 2006 to 2016. Professor Wong's research interests straddle comparative public policy and political economy. He is a very well-published researcher with a number of seminal books and publications to his credit, spanning democracy to biotech. I was very keenly interested in the kind of work he has done in biotech particularly. Professor Wong's books include his latest work on From Development to Democracy, The Transformation of Modern Asia, published by Princeton University Press in 2022. Inspired by the Sustainable Development Goals, in collaboration with the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, Professor Wong founded the Research Alliance, and he also runs the Public Policy Innovation Lab. Welcome, Professor Wong. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Raj, and thank you to my colleagues for their really inspiring and visionary words to start off this conversation. It's truly an honor for myself and the University of Toronto to be a part of this conversation. I thought I would just begin with my comments by looking ahead to the post-2030 agenda, which is not to say that we ought to be wrapping up the current work that we're doing in the SDGs, but I think it's also wise for us as a sector to start thinking about what the post-2030 conversation is going to look like. And I say this because one of the things that's always struck me about the SDGs was this was a set of conversations, obviously, that preceded their announcement in 2015. But it strikes me that the universities weren't at that table. And I think that's a very strange and unfortunate absence. This was, of course, an intergovernmental agreement, and so universities and academics were on the sidelines advising our governments, our Sherpas, and so forth, but not directly at the table. The global corporate community, of course, found themselves at the table in putting together the Global Compact and so forth. And again, the universities weren't a part of that conversation. It strikes me that this absence is deeply problematic. After all, it's within our universities that these new technologies are being developed. Increasingly, it's through our universities that new technologies and platforms are being driven further downstream, commercialized into markets, but also utilized by governments and organizations around the world. It strikes me that within universities is where we're seeing the public policy innovations that are required to support the development and the further enhancement and scaling up of these SDG interventions. And I think most importantly, and as both of my colleagues have already mentioned, the next generation of leaders who will be carrying forth the mantle of the post-2030 agenda are in our classrooms right now. The University of Toronto is privileged to have over 90,000 students across our 3 campuses. And we turn this over every 4 years. So just imagine this extraordinary pipeline of talent that we are cultivating at the moment, and not just in terms of the skills and expertise that are going to be required to carry forth the mantle of leadership, but the mindset. And both Richard and David have already talked about this, how this next generation of leaders take the SDGs as really, an existential mission, that they've taken a kind of generational ownership over this agenda. And they're in our classrooms right now. So let me just then conclude my opening remarks by suggesting that let's not find ourselves outside of the conversation again, as we did in 2015. It's as though the SDG agenda, if you think about it in cartographical terms, was a map in which we had baseline, which was the starting point, and we had a set of targets, which was our final destination, with very little sense of how we were going to get from point A to point B. And it seems to me that that's precisely the kind of knowledge that universities can provide. So I'd encourage our colleagues as we move forward and we start thinking about the post-2030 conversation, that we coalesce, galvanize, get our ducks in order, and that we as a sector find ourselves at that table in order to establish the next agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for these lucid remarks. Our next speaker for the session is Professor Miki Sugimura, who is a professor of education at Sophia University, Japan. She earned her undergrad BA degree in education from Okano-Mizuyi Men's University and MA PhD degrees in education from the University of Tokyo. Professor Sugimura is a renowned scholar focusing on education and sustainable development, citizenship education in the multicultural societies, cross-border migration, and the nation state. She also works on transformation of civil society in the post-globalization world. Professor Sugimura has extensively contributed to our understanding of sustaining cultural connectivity between internationalization and localization, which is particularly important in the context of sustainable development goals and significance of liberal arts. She has also worked on significance of liberal arts program in higher education. She would surely tell us something about the curricular aspects of SDGs and translational education. Professor Sugimura was appointed as a member of International Expert Group on the revision of 1974 recommendations by UNESCO in 2022 and is currently the principal investigator of comparative and international education research at Sophia University and for education for sustainable development in Asia, and is also the principal instigator of international collaboration research on visualization of students' learning outcome in higher education. Welcome, Professor Sugimura. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Raj. A very kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm very honored to be included this wonderful session, the Shifting Goalposts University Role in Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in G20 countries. Actually, today I would like to talk about the three perspectives from my past careers. The first one is my former vice president of my university of the Global Academic Affairs. When I was a vice president, I had a wonderful connection with a lot of universities in the world. And at that time, we talked about a lot of the dialogue on the SDGs and universities' roles, especially many universities, including our university, now interested in how we can enrich our education program for SDGs from the perspective is the transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach. Because the SDGs have a lot of target, 17 goals and 1967 target, but most of them are very complicated and we need to pursue to the transdisciplinary approach from the different perspective, which also raised another point, how we can enrich our students or our staff and members as a global citizen. Now SDG Goal 4 point on the education, point out the importance of the equity, diversity, and inclusion, including the global citizenship and education for sustainable development, ESD. Many international societies now discussing about the ESD for 2030, which is a target year of the SDGs. But these points include the whole school approach or whole institute approach or community engagement, policy-led approach, those points are always focused on the youth, which means our students. So future global citizens should be nurtured by our university education. My another experience is at the United Nations University Institute of Advanced Study for Sustainability, which is headquartered in Tokyo. Now I'm a visiting professor there, and UNU IAS organized a wonderful universities inter-regional network, which called is ProsperNet, which focusing on the graduate education on the sustainability, which includes the 51 Asia Pacific regions universities focusing on the sustainability studies. Another my experiences at the UNESCO, as already Professor Raja kindly introduced, I was a member of the international expert group on the revision of 1974 recommendation. Some of you know about this recommendation, which was created about more than 50 years ago. At that time, nobody expected such kind of complicated era like this. But this recommendation focused on the peace, human rights, and those points also raise the importance of the international cooperation. Now UNESCO and international world has discussing how we can revise this 1974 recommendation can be adjusted to the modern era. And we proposed one draft last year, focusing on the peace, human rights, and sustainability. Now this recommendation is under the member states discussion, and maybe this year in autumn, UNESCO General Assembly will discuss to finalize this revised recommendation. So this point is also raised the importance of the university's role for creating the future's global citizen and education for sustainable development. The lastly but not least, I'd like to emphasize the importance of our future collaboration and solidarity. Last year, the UNESCO issued a wonderful report, The Futures of Education, and also they organized a Transforming Education Summit, which was held in New York headquarters. And they are also discussing about the importance of the universities, not only universities, but education sectors, the international cooperation and solidarity. This is also important for our education program of the university to enrich more from the transdisciplinary and also multi-perspective. For example, now we are now still in the COVID situation, but this also gives us another new format or new normal learning and teaching style in the university. Sophia University now is very, very involving in the COIL, collaborative online international learning. This is not only just connecting the network by online or virtual, we also enrich our classroom education by connecting professors and professors, classrooms and classroom, and also students' activity are more enriched by connecting on the virtual education. So I think most of your university also introduced this kind of the hybrid style, but now we are pursuing the new possibility and the new role of universities in this complicated era through those kind of a new format of education. So I'm very, very happy to discuss these points tonight. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sugimura. The next speaker for the session is Professor Meera Sampath, who is currently Associate Dean for Research at Watson College of Engineering and Applied Sciences, Binghamton University, USA. Professor Sampath received her BE, MTech, and PhD in Electric and Engineering from Anna University, the Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, respectively, and also later at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. She is well known and recognized worldwide for her contributions to the area of discrete event systems and automated failure diagnosis. Professor Sampath is uniquely placed to be talking about her own experience in beyond academic career, though she has a very distinguished academic career as well and holds 15 US patents. Dr. Sampath's current research interests include social implications of technology and socially responsible automation. Professor Sampath was formerly Associate Vice Chancellor for Research at the State University of New York System and leader SUNY's system-wide Artificial Intelligence Research Initiative, including SUNY IBM AI Alliance and SUNY AFRL AI. Professor Sampath, the floor is yours. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, good evening. It is an honor and pleasure to join you all today. My very warm thanks to OP Jindal Global University and to the organizers of this conference for their very kind invitation. And greetings to my distinguished fellow panelists and Professor Pandit. Complementing the excellent insights shared by the previous speakers, I would like to focus on the role of research and innovation in achieving sustainable development, and in particular, socially responsible research and technology development. Now, at a very high level, as we all know, there are two categories of research. One that is curiosity-driven, that pushes the boundaries of science and spurs new discoveries from quantum theory to giant black holes, maybe. The other, what is called as use-inspired research, aims to address key economic priorities and societal challenges while also solving major technical and scientific problems. In the United States, the National Science Foundation, for example, has been heavily promoting use-inspired research in many areas directly linked to the SDGs, such as, for example, climate change and clean energy, food and nutrition security, and improving the quality of life for people with disabilities. At Binghamton University, promoting such use-inspired research is a very key focus for us. At an institutional level, we have created platforms to bring such multidisciplinary experts together, provide them with the right support infrastructures and the right incentives to carry out such research. And we have also invested significantly in promoting community engagement in driving such research. Now, let me move on to another key point that I would like to raise in this panel. When we talk about technology and social impact, generally the focus is on the use of technology for good, say to improve healthcare, education, livelihood, and so on. But most technologies, especially those that can have a transformational impact on society, can also have serious unintended negative consequences. Think, for example, of the internet, social media, AI, or automation and its impact if it is not used appropriately on productive jobs and employment. That is an SDG goal as well. The question, and this ties to what Professor Wong mentioned earlier, how are we preparing our future scientists, engineers, managers, business leaders, and policymakers, the people who are going to be designing the next generation of transformative technologies, putting them to use, making decisions on how and where to use them? Are we equipping them with the right knowledge, the tools, and the experiences that they need? That is something I would say is addressed only minimally, if at all, in formal curriculum. How many engineering students, for example, formally learn ethical frameworks and how to apply them in the design and development of, say, autonomous vehicles or synthetic biology? How many classrooms do we have where students from the social sciences or law are working jointly with data scientists to understand and mitigate bias in AI systems, for example? So I will close by saying that fundamental to driving sustainable development is to provide our students with integrated educational and research experiences that cross transdisciplinary boundaries, that also embed socially conscious thinking and expand their horizons beyond the classroom into our communities. Thank you again for the opportunity to share my thoughts, and I look forward very much to the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Meera. All right, so we go to the Q&A session. What we had done, there was a brief email exchange between David, Meera, and myself, that rather than having these, elaborate 8 or 9 questions. So what I have done is that I have grouped them because there was some kind of repetition. So I have grouped them. So I would maybe throw open to the floor the question as we go ahead, and then each one of you I will invite to respond. Then we can. Is that okay with you?
Certainly.
Yeah. Okay. So the first question that we may like to take up is, what's the role of universities in achieving sustainable development goals? Though we have briefly shared our experiences. Some of you have shared your own university and other experiences, but I would still like to go. So maybe we start with we start with Professor Wong, because he has to leave. So Professor Wong, would you like to take that question?
Sure. Thank you so much. And I'm still reflecting and digesting all of the terrific insights raised by my colleagues. And I have to say, we're preaching to the choir here. We're all singing from the same hymn book as I'm listening to all of you talk about transdisciplinary research and pedagogy. It warms my heart, and it's something that I think we're all on the same page in regards to it. But we also recognize that this is something that as a sector, I think we have to do some convincing outside of our sector, and for society to recognize many of the things that we're talking about here. And so I welcome the opportunity to work with colleagues in developing that kind of advocacy strategy, whether it be in terms of our public policymakers or just sort of thought leadership in society more generally. One of the things that I thought I would comment on, though, in terms of the specific role that universities can play, is to leverage our extraordinary convening capacity as a really distinctive institution within society, and actually an institution that is shared across all socioeconomic contexts, all geographical contexts, and so forth, whether we're talking about universities in high-income countries or universities in low- and middle-income countries. We share similar missions, and we share the same characteristic of having extraordinary convening capacity. We're not governments, we're not the private sector, and we generally have scale that outstrips anything we might see in the NGO sector. So that puts us in a very distinctive position to partner, I think, in very new and interesting ways. And one of the things that the University of Toronto has been engaged with is developing more partnerships with institutions in what we might call the Global South, or institutions in low and middle income countries. And this has been just an extraordinary, humbling experience for the University of Toronto. It's forced us to be much more agile. It's forced us to eliminate the kind of clumsiness that you might expect from a big, well-resourced institution in the global north in terms of its partnership building with institutions elsewhere. And one of the things that has emerged through this process, and something that has really become part of our lingua franca at U of T, and I suspect elsewhere, is this idea of co-creation. And how do you co-create partners with institutions that share similar missions, but may not have the same kind of institutional features and resources? And this is, I think, really deserves some deep thinking, as well as some self-reflection. And then, as always, how do you put this into practice? And just a couple of things that we've reflected on at U of T as we've begun to develop these kinds of collaborative partnerships is moving from a kind of transactional partnership building process to one that's much more relational, where we are focused more on the process of partnership building as opposed to simply the outputs. We have deliberately moved from any notion of hierarchy to a much more inclusive conversation. And part of that, of course, means then redefining what it is we mean by the value in these partnerships to really aligning our values as institutions. And I would just say, as a final point, a focus more on equity as opposed to equality, recognizing that institutions in different settings bring different things to the table. And how do we redefine the currency that we are making these kinds of exchanges and so forth? This is all to say, this is, I think if we were to be honest, this is really greenfield for many of us. This is an opportunity that many of us are only just beginning to think about quite deeply and quite seriously. And so I welcome other thoughts and reflections on this. The U of T has just recently established the U of T Center in Mumbai. And this has opened up a whole new vista of opportunities for us. But as I always say to our colleagues here at U of T, we need to be very careful. We need to infuse this new center with a spirit and practice of co-creation. It cannot be an instrument of hierarchy or dominance. It really does have to be in the spirit of co-creative partnership building. So again, I think if we would all be truthful, we were to be truthful with one another, this is something that's a big undertaking, and that we have to approach it with a new kind of modesty. And so I welcome thoughts and insights from other colleagues as well as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you. David, would you like to take it forward? Role of universities?
Sure, I would second everything that Professor Wong just said. I would say, unfortunately, in the US, we face an additional challenge that I think are not present in a lot of the other countries represented on this panel and in the participants, which is climate change itself is a political issue. Although it is not for our young people, the overwhelming majority of which recognize the science behind it. In the US, we are still unfortunately engaged in deeply partisan political debate about climate and how to solve it. And so the convening role of universities are, as institutions that focus on facts, on respectful dialogue and debate, it is even more important than it's ever been in my whole life and career, because we are losing that, unfortunately, in our country in the public discourse, and we're running out of time. And so maybe the only place where I would disagree slightly with Professor Wong is, while yes, we need to focus on 2030, I think the latest UN report suggests we can't wait till then. We have an absolutely burning, literally burning platform and need for action. And we all as institutions need to inspire the folks to take that action now, not just to teach about it or do research on it, but I very much agree with Meera that we need to focus on the use cases. And the good news is that's also what we've learned is the best way to teach our students. Take real world problems, get them in multidisciplinary teams, work with community partners, corporate partners, and solve those problems now. That's what we need to do.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, David. Meera, since you were named, so I might as well come to you. You reflect a bit more on this.
Thank you. Yes, I think I would very much like to re-emphasize the wonderful points made by David and Dr. Wong. I think to re-emphasize what I said earlier, a fundamental role for universities is to encourage more faculty and students to really take up such goal-oriented, use-inspired research. I mean, fundamental research is always exciting, but I think focusing on use-inspired research with a very specific purpose is something that universities should do. And again, going back to what Dr. Wong said, the whole idea of co-creation is very, very critical here. Co-creation and with your partners, but also co-creation with the community. And to re-emphasize what I said earlier, to look at both the positives and the negatives of the technologies that we may be developing. And a big role for universities in that particular regard is to provide the right structures by which faculty and researchers can engage with the community. At Binghamton University, for example, we have a Center for Civic Engagement that plays a very, very vital role in connecting faculty and students with the larger community, and also providing people with the right incentives. We have our rewards and recognition, for example, for faculty who engage in community-focused learning and community-focused scholarship. So I think a big role for universities is to encourage, focus the culture more on such use-inspired and society-focused research. And of course, that goes a long way in also driving inclusivity within the campus. But another key point I would like to say is that we talked about students and the role of the classroom in driving SDGs. We talked about community engagement and research. If there is a way for universities to treat their research mission, their education mission, and their service mission as one integrated priority, If that could be done, I think that would go a very, very long way for us to be able to really pool our resources and have the maximum impact.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I just say that as part of Institution of Eminence, which OP Jindal Global University is part, so one of the key, facets of Institution of Eminence is that how do we engage in a more socially responsible and useful research activity and community engagement at that. So the point well taken. Richard, would you like to come? I may request, because we're just left with about half an hour. So we have 4 more broad questions to address. So Richard, would you like to reflect on the role of universities? Because you have been driving a whole lot of things at Exeter related to this.
Thank you very much. And I think the role of universities, as I alluded to earlier, has to be catalytic. We have to be, and I agree completely with David's observation, we are on a burning platform and we need to deliver that change now. Now, how are we going to do that within a packed agenda for universities, within a politically charged environment, such as David's alluded to in the US, but inside a mix of other conflicting agendas that make the SDGs all the more important, but all the more distant in terms of partners, particularly in the global South, where issues, for example, of climate change are very much tied up with economic development and indeed with the legacies of colonial rule. And Joe was absolutely right in his comments around the work that they're doing in Mumbai around creating a sustainable partnership model, one that delivers upon the SDG, but does not preach upon the SDG agenda. That we mustn't leave this, in the words of Ian Scones, who is a leading scholar in development studies and sustainable development studies, we must not deliver this to the extent to which it becomes a quasi-colonial narrative of social and economic change, because that message is characteristic of the global North, but will land and fail in many other parts of the globe. And so I think the universities, to come back to Raj's point, the universities have to be integrative frameworks. They need to be flagging our research agendas that address not just the headlines of the themes, but also work creatively to deliver across them. So I think, speaking more generally than perhaps we've heard with specific institutional examples thus far, I think there's an absolute agenda for universities, but I do think that the global North that needs to work very, very, very consciously to land and support the way that the SDG agenda is addressed for the rest of the world.
So, yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay, okay. So Richard, I think, abruptly dropped it. Okay, Professor Sugimura, would you like to come in, and then we go to the next question, please, briefly.
Very much for giving me opportunity. Yeah, actually, I also would like to echo the Professor Wong's point out is the co-creation. That is a wonderful point for us to pursue together. If we can pursue that point, maybe we need to nurture the critical thinker, the critical thinking or creativity. Those are global competencies, should be very important for our education. But also I would like to focus on the research, because now different from the primary and secondary education, now our higher education sector can enjoy more the kind of academic freedom to ensure the transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach, so which is very important point for the education for sustainable development. So in that sense, maybe research always should be very important basement of creating the new education program, I think. So in that sense, maybe those kind of global competency should be also very important point when we think about the evaluation of the student learning outcome and also faculty and staff development in the university, I think. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. The next point I wish to discuss is this, how do we then at universities, how do we engage with local communities? What is the incentive for the university on the one hand, and what is the incentive to the local community to be engaging with the university? Because we have so far lived in the so-called ivory towers, and because of this kind of a wide gap. So how do we first narrow this gap between the broader society and then, of course, then engage the community? Because community at some level is skeptical, or even it has a lot of self-doubt when it comes to engaging with academics who still bear that cross of elitism around them. So we have to be extremely, I thought that we have to be extremely cautious to tread on this. So David, would you like to come on this? And other colleagues who have had experience of engaging with the community, Joe after David, and then we can take it forward. Go ahead, David.
Well, I would just very much echo the idea of both co-creation and being genuine in that engagement, that the notion of starting with the problems, the issues identified by the user, by the community, and not by us, I think is a great starting point. So let me just give you two concrete examples of how to make this real that we've done at Chatham. One, working with an impoverished local African-American community. We have helped them to make their community more sustainable by working on projects that they've identified, transforming vacant lots into urban gardens, transferring our technology around aquaculture so that they could model a circular economy. They could cultivate fish and use the waste of fish to grow herbs and tomatoes and other vegetables. Another one during the pandemic. So I think around the world, restaurants closed overnight, and we saw lots of food insecurity. So our food studies program worked with local restaurants and food service organizations to organize a program where customers could place an online order, the restaurants got business, and then the food was delivered to people in the community who had need. And so I think by being genuine and engaging around the problems that exist in our communities and those opportunities, we can help both. And as I alluded to earlier, what we found is that also is the most meaningful learning experience for the students, because it's not just book learning or a test, it's having a chance to work together to solve real world problems.
Excellent. Joe, would you like to go? You are on mute.
Just a quick comment before I have to take off. I want to actually tie it back to David's point around the very fraught sort of partisan context within which many of our institutions are operating, and I both empathize and sympathize in terms of the kinds of battles that we have to be contending with all the time. Where universities are seen as the home of the woke left and so forth, which of course then triggers a whole bunch of partisan debates and arguments, and nothing gets done. What I'm entirely convinced of, however, is that the generation of students who are in our classrooms right now, they have, and I used the term earlier on, taken generational ownership over the core concerns of what make up the SDG agenda. This is not just something that's part of the life cycle effect. I really do believe that young people see the challenges that we face now as deeply existential. And so the opportunity here for us as a university or as a university sector is to do precisely what David has talked about, and that is to provide real-world, impactful, authentic experiences for students in collaboration with their professors to affect change at very local levels. And that is important in one sense from a pedagogical point of view. It's a hand-on, applied experiential learning opportunity. But I think even deeper than that, Raj, what it demonstrates is that it provides a sense of empowerment to this next generation, that it actually gives them the confidence and the audacity to make a difference today, that they're not waiting their turn to climb the ladder so that 30 years hence they are in a position of leadership. But in fact, as entrepreneurs, as impact investors, as public policy makers, as journalists, as graduate students and researchers and so forth, they can have an impact now. And that, is in part in developing very community-oriented partnerships, but also thinking more globally. But this is the opportunity we have. And frankly, there are very few other platforms or institutions that have the same kind of access that we have. And so I think it's something we ought to be taking full advantage of as a sector. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Professor Sugimura, can you briefly come?
Thank you very much. Very briefly, if I add one more example from our university, now our universities ask the student stuff, which means the students also enjoying creating the inclusive campus. So they also working together with some staff or professors together, and also involving in the local community engagement. Just sending the university's report on the sustainability and also inclusion on the chat box. So if you're interested in our activities, you can take a look later. But anyway, very happy to share with our experiences. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Richard, community engagement.
Yes. Yeah. May I make a few comments?
Yeah, Meera. Go ahead.
So yes, very much I agree with what was said earlier, that students are very, very core and central to this whole process, providing them the right research experiences, the way to engage with community, and the educational experiences and so on is very, very critical. But I would also like to go, Professor Pandit, to a comment that you said at the beginning is the need to approach such community engagement, perhaps even in a cautious manner, right? I think the key to effective community engagement is really to treat it as an engagement, as a true partnership. This is not just outreach. This is not, just service. When we talk about engaging the community, we have to approach this with mutual respect, with mutual sharing of knowledge and so on. So treating the engagement with the community as a true partnership, so that their voices are fully heard and respected and taken into what we do, could go a very, very long way in avoiding the kind of issues that you mentioned earlier. Of course, sometimes this could be done. I talked earlier about having a formal structure like a Center for Civic Engagement. Entities like that act as a facilitator, that act as a mediator between our researchers and students, and the larger community can also play a very critical role in avoiding some of the concerns or potential issues that you talked about earlier. Another key point in community engagement, I would say, is to bring to the table for discussions, not just the experts, not just the people who we think are going to directly benefit from a technology, but also to make sure that we consciously identify and bring to the discussion people who are typically left out of such technology conversations. And these are the people who are likely to maybe negatively get affected by the consequences of technology development. So focusing specifically on the people who may benefit, but also the people who are typically left behind, and these are typically our vulnerable populations. Giving them a seat also at the table would make for very effective community engagement.
Thank you, Meera. May I come to the last two questions? One is that how important is, though we have talked about it, so we may sort of look at it, interdisciplinary collaboration and collaboration with NGOs and private sector. So let me come to Meera first. Meera, can you take this, because you have spent time in private sector and have been an innovator. So how do you sort of bring that space, that private sector space? Again, private sector, as I said, for broader community, private sector also at times, though it's changing, is quite skeptical, because of all the things that you mentioned, I may add, we as university professors and academics may add to what the basket of things, what you said, is humility. We have to approach this with humility, because we cannot go with this assumption that communities have to learn from us, because there are a whole lot of things which we may have to learn from the community itself. And particularly in sustainability, I'm not talking about innovations and technology, but the applications and how the approach to responsible technology and responsible research. So take it quickly and maybe briefly a sentence or two, then we can go around the table again. Go ahead.
Sure, I will be very brief. I think the good news is that more and more corporations are now taking their corporate social responsibility very seriously, right? CSR is not just philanthropy or charity as it used to be. There is increasing awareness that what is good for the business, it can also be good for society, or vice versa. What is good for society can also be good for the business. So there is more recognition of such shared value and shared value creation. So a key role is for universities in this context to identify those partners who are in the private sector who are much more focused on creating shared value, and to give our research, our faculty and our students the experiences to work with such partners. And of course, such industry partners may also be much more inclined to sponsor or fund projects that we are interested in, given their social, corporate social responsibility interests. So I will stop there.
Thank you. Richard, would you take it, please? Take it from Richard.
Yes, absolutely. I think actually it's a really live topic. So at the University of Exeter, we have a leading mining school, one of the top 10 in the world. And the focus in mining, which is traditionally considered a destructive area and leading to environmental degradation, et cetera, the whole focus right now on critical minerals, on the technology that drives these phones, for example, the focus on critical minerals is so guided now, laser-like focus on a renewable economy basis, that every sector, even the areas which were considered, if you like, to be environmentally destructive in the past, are now absolutely aligned on those agendas. And we at universities, as we've heard, really need to be clocking into those relationships to scale them and indeed to work with corporate partners on that journey. Thank you.
Next. Thank you. David?
Yeah, I would just mention two things I think the private sector bring that are much more difficult for us in the public or nonprofit university sector. One is they have very deep pockets and resources, but the other is the ability to scale things globally. So just to show putting my money where my mouth is, so this is my final term at Chatham. I'm going to be joining a Dutch startup called Tor Green and Tor Power that has a technology to take any form of dry bio waste and turn it into a renewable coal. And so it has the potential to run all of India's coal plants with a renewable fuel from waste that is now not being used, that is being burnt or plowed under in the field. I think we need 10 to 12 global scalable solutions like this to be invested in and scaled as quickly as possible if we're to not just get to net zero, but start taking some of the carbon out of the atmosphere to avoid the really challenging circumstances we're already seeing with severe weather.
Professor Sugimura, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, actually, the private sector is now also very involved in SDGs activities. When we faced it on the MDGs about 20 years ago, no company, no private sectors are interested. But now it's many sectors are interested in this one because SDGs always focus on all of sectors. But that's the point, we must focus on it. So, of course, the private sectors should be taking importance on the profit or something, but all the sectors must consider as already Professor Wong already pointed out, now we need to think about the equality, but equity should be also very important. Even the private sectors pursue some profits at that point. So we want to share some common values or the public goods, which the universities sectors can create those kind of points when we take or together to realize the sustainable development goals for the futures, the sustainable societies, I think. So thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to say something.
So let me come to the last mile, if I may. What could be the challenges to universities in promoting SDGs? So we need to identify, though during this session we have some idea that what could be the challenges, whether it is in the form of community engagement or private sector engagement, though their society as a whole is changing, and many of you have alluded to the role that a very nasty virus, namely COVID-19, played in that, but it brought, in fact, the worst and best of us during that period of time. So, David, what do you can you enumerate the challenges and how to sort of overcome these challenges at universities to promote SDGs? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think there are unfortunately many. One I've alluded to already, more unique to the US, I think, is the deep partisanship around these issues. I think a couple of others. One is resources. Many of our institutions, we are struggling because, at least in the US, we're seeing a decline in the number of high school graduates in many parts of the country, and so the enrollment that we have counted on for our business models is being challenged. I think the other is that we're already seeing the impacts of climate change. So just yesterday, I was concerned, could I join you, because we lost power due to a severe storm that came through Pittsburgh. And so we're going to see more and more, not just resource constrained, but we're going to be having to spend more of our budgets to deal with resiliency and the impact of climate. And so this is, to me, all of it points to the need toward stakeholder partnerships, all of us working together on solutions that will benefit the universities, but also benefit our local regions and our community partners.
Richard?
Yes, just to add to that, I think what we've just heard is crucial, not least because certainly in the US and in Europe more generally, UK particularly, there's a great deal of skepticism within the public about the role of universities. Deep skepticism about the concept of knowledge, which is where it becomes a partisan debate over climate change. And given that there is skepticism, and even despite creating the vaccines that solved COVID, you'd imagine universities would be riding high at the very moment, but we're not. Globally, we are embattled in our political contexts. And I think one of the challenges we face is cutting through at the moment as universities and as knowledge leaders, cutting through to the public debate, which is being led by other stakeholders. And I think part of the work that we need to do is creating the partnerships that we've just heard about that deliver demonstrable, proof-led, evidence-based changes that you can measure up and say, the university did this and university did that. And I think one of the points David said earlier is also very true. Universities are actually very small organizations. Some of them are really very small, but even the largest universities in the world are themselves, in comparative terms, relatively small organizations. How do we, as institutions, make those changes? And that's part of where we need to work together in these types of networks to deliver meaningful change. Thanks.
Meera?
Yes, I agree very, very much with the comments that have just been made. I think changing the public perception, having this positive impact on the community to be perceived by the community is very, very critical. I also agree that resources are key for universities to be able to make a large impact, particularly large sustained impact, to be able to scale our impact and our solutions. But I'd also mention one other thing, which is a cultural shift, right? We talk a lot about multidisciplinary research and so on. That really also requires people to be able to shake hands across the aisle, to be able to communicate effectively with people from other disciplines with mutual respect and with mutual knowledge sharing. So I think this is a whole set of challenges, from having the right cultural mindset within our institutions to be able to work across the aisle, to be able to work with our community partners, and yes, as was mentioned earlier, having a positive impact in terms of the community acceptance and mindset is very critical.
Professor Sugimura, please.
Thank you very much. Now our university sector has been facing the neoliberalism, and the internationalization of higher education accelerate more the competition or efficiency. That's the point we must face and overcome. On the other hand, but the internationalization also give us a lot of opportunity for our collaboration and cooperation more. So in that case, we can create a kind of the good academic platform through those kind of international program. But another point is raised, but those kind of is a transparency or a credential system, how we can create those kind of the common base platform for sharing values and knowledge and curriculum like that. So in that sense, we need to more promote the dialogue or the discussion among the universities in the world, which also can give us a lot of opportunities to create a good, more multidisciplinary approach or realization of SDGs, I think. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had a wonderful session. I thank all the distinguished speakers, Professor Finegold, Professor Follett, Professor Wong, Professor Sugimura, Professor Sampath, for sharing their views and participating in the question answer session. We had quite wide-ranging, may not be in-depth discussions, but have covered various disparate topics related to role of university in achieving sustainable development goals. Not only in the context of G20 countries, but also in the global context. So now, briefly, if I may summarize a couple of points, which has been my own learning in this whole session, is that a couple of points that have emerged during the discussion is this concept of co-creation, which I think most of us agree that we have to learn to do it together, even if we are at different stages of development or resource availability. The second most important dimension that I think most of us have sort of touched upon is how to make this, if I may use this word, though it is a very tall order, politically neutral. How sustainable developmental, agenda or goals could be made politically neutral. I know it's a very difficult thing to say, but how to develop a bipartisan or multipartisan, because North America has bipartisan democracies. We have innumerable partisan democracies. So in India, so that is that of course is a challenge. And the third thing, which I liked, the idea that most of the future of these SDGs and the future of universities, since we are holders of futures in our own classrooms in terms of students who, in a sense, have adopted this idea of sustainability, in a sense, particularly with reference to climate change and the impacts it has had on our lives, as their own agenda. So they did not need much of persuasion, possibly. So the youth, so engaging youth in not only in our classrooms, The fourth thing which we have also touched upon is how to now take it beyond the classrooms. So classrooms are covered, research labs are covered, how to take it beyond the classrooms to and engage community. Perhaps bring them as equal partners. So stop talking about equality, but equity. And as I said earlier, I want to re-emphasize, perhaps sort of approach this with more humility. And then the fifth point, how do we make this cultural shift among the institutions? How do we change this language or lingo of this this otherwise elitist kind of looking agenda, which sometimes communities may doubt us about? This is an traditionally what has happened has that sustainable development as a paradigm look at the world from Washington, D.C. It's somehow whether we like it or not. So how now do we bring it to grassroots? How do we convince our people that no, this is for you, this is meant for you, if we need ourselves? So therefore, can we change both the narrative as well as the language of this? This is important. And can we sort of slowly bring in the global South, which is the theme which India is sort of now leading, that the voice of global South, the voice of East Asia, Asia, that the traditional, as David possibly mentioned, or Richard mentioned, or the second nature, I think Richard mentioned second nature. So how do we bring that narrative to the table and that language to the table? And finally, the collaboration and not competition. So along with competition, because competition and excellence will coexist, I would not fight with that, but how to now in the teeth of competition, how do we collaborate? One of the examples which we have raised, some of our colleagues have raised in a recent paper in MBO, which we published, is that, for the global sustainability to succeed, we must bring India and China on board. There are no two opinions about it. If India and China are not collaborating in research, collaborating in everything, you can forget about global sustainability. Because if you look at carbon emissions and things like that, then they're both driving much of this. So how do we bring that, because everything else is hostage to some kind of geopolitics. So I cannot elaborate more than that, because I will lose the connection very soon. So I once again thank you for being with us, and from here at OP Jindal Global University and Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability, I thank all the participants. I thank all the distinguished speakers for taking out time. I hope we will remain in touch and forge collaborations as we have agreed upon. And then, because there is only one Earth, as they say, and we are only one species which is struggling to survive. So, and to sort of pleasurize both David and Richard and Joe that the platform is already burning. So how to douse the fires. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.